Haggai. Haggai, can you make sure that
I can see it.
Haggai, can you please kindly make sure that your light is a bit brighter, because when you appeared, you were barely visible. Hello, Haggai, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Sibanda. Maybe I'll just have to go outside because I'm in the room and the light is very blared. That much better.
Much better. We can see you now.
All right. Okay. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are things in Zambia?
So we're trying to push. Just that a lot of issues are going on. You know, we are going for elections next year, so there are a lot of preparations around the voter registration, which most of these issues. We are going for elections next year.
Every year.
No, it's after 5 years. Our last election was in 2016.
I thought you were like Zimbabwe. Every year we are talking about elections.
Ah, come on. You just talk about them, but you don't vote. You just talk about them.
What do you mean when you say we don't vote?
You don't vote every year. When are you even having your elections?
You don't always vote with the, you can vote with your money. How you spend it each day can tell you if you are supporting the system or not.
If it is that way, then it's a case with Zambia as well.
It's 12 o'clock. Do we start now? I can see that how many people have already joined in. We have got 12 participants. Do we give a bit of 5 minutes or so to wait for others to join in, and then we start? Worst case scenario, it could be at 10 past 12. Yeah.
I think it's okay. We can start by 10 past 12. I sent the presentation to Brian Mtao.
To listen to you, but you should be able.
Yeah, you should be able to use your screen to share. Haggai, you've got the capacity to do that.
All right. Okay. Okay.
Can you test in advance right now?
Okay. Can you see it from there?
Let's wait a bit. We are good now.
Okay. All right. Okay.
away. We have got now left with 5 to 6 minutes before we start.
Comms. Maybe I should write that. Comms, we really need to write this. How far they need to advertise the thing on social media?
Let me just say online. Online, we have 6 people watching. The volume is there. But if you're an employee, you should join on there. But we have 6 people who are watching. So, oh, shit. Gloria.
She's joining. That's good. For the day for the Pan-African Conference on Illicit Financial Flows. The discussion topic here is about climate change and its impact in terms of the demand and supply of mineral commodities, and the implication it has in terms of domestic resource mobilization. Are we likely to see any policy shifts in terms of taxation and illicit financial flows? So we have got a health panel here that is going to help us to ventilate this issue in line with our discussion on how to leverage the mining sector for domestic resource mobilization to fund Africa's development aspirations. So we have got Kwaku, Afari from Ghana, who did a discussion paper. It's still to be finalized, and you share it. We also have got Haggai, Zambia, Gloria from Malawi that are also the panelists that are also going to help us to ventilate further this discussion for others to come in. So allow me now to give this opportunity and space to Kwaku Afari from Ghana. Thank you.
Hello, good morning to everyone. Hello.
Kwaku.
Yes, can I be heard?
Very
yes,
clear.
Now, please go ahead.
Okay, so good morning to everyone. For us in Ghana, it's around 9. It's around 9 a.m. So it's good morning from us. And also my greetings to everyone who has joined this webinar. And first of all, I'd like to thank Trust Africa for giving us the opportunity to really dialogue on this subject discussion. It's an area which is of major concern to all of us, and I believe that by the time we complete or we would have done with this session, we would have been able to move ahead or forge ahead in looking at issues concerning climate change and its impact on tax and mining and all those issues. In fact, I should have presented the paper so for discussion, I think about 2 or 3 days ago, but unfortunately I've been out of town, out and about all this while, so I really needed to just share what I had done earlier on with the trust team. So forgive me for not really concluding it, but I do have some recommendations here which I would add on to whatever I sent. And I believe that by the end of the discussion, we would all be at a position that we can all equally understand each other. So yes, my name is Kwaku Afari, and I work for an organization in Ghana known as Wacam. And Wacam is a civil society organization that mainly works with mining communities that are affected by mining, especially those who are the marginalized or the affected people in mining communities. And our reason for working with them is simple, that these are people that are affected mostly by the activities of multinational mining companies who are highly resourced, and through their extractive activities or mining activities, community people are affected one way or the other, whereby people are shortchanged, whereby people's rights are being abused just in order to extract minerals or to make way for these mineral resources. So our aim for over all these years, we've been in advocacy for over 22 years. And what we've been doing is supporting communities, the marginalized farmers who are affected by these mining activities, empowering them and making sure that they demand their rights to responsible mining, in that mining which is free from pollution of water bodies that they depend on, mining which will be free from abuse of human rights, and mining which will protect our environment. So these are issues that we have been hovering on as an organization all this while. When I received the concept to talk about issues on climate change and mining, and looking at the three other parameters that was involved, including revenue, taxation, and the IFFs, it's quite loaded. It's quite a loaded discussion, but I told the team that I'll look at it from our angle as Wacam, as we've been working with for all this while. So yes, I may address most of the issues, but if there are some which are left out, maybe in the course of the discussions, I can equally cover them as well. I'll try as much as possible to cover most of it. I would want to share my screen, if that is okay.
Please go ahead, and just be mindful of also time, so that others can chip in, and also the floor can also contribute. Thank you.
Okay. So let me be as fast as possible in sharing my screen.
Kwaku, I think just please go ahead, so that at least we in an hour, in 44 minutes time will be done in terms of the conversation. So please.
Oh, okay. Okay. So but I think I can do it now, so that we can all be on the same page. Okay. So I think I'm here. Okay. So is my screen shared? Okay. So I looked at the discussion we have based on I looked at Ghana mostly I used Ghana as a case study, and also research into other literature. And all over the world, we know that our economies, resource-rich countries, are heavily dependent on mining for reasons at best being the taxes and the royalties and the rents that we do derive from it. But it's quite undisputable that in the exploitation of our minerals, it has been associated with various effects, and that includes the pollution of our water bodies and our forests, and the upsurge in diseases related to the mining activities in relation to mining. So mining in all has its issues have become more of a development controversy, whereby communities are saying that they are not benefiting much from the mining activities, and whereby government is also pushing the agenda of the royalties. And when we take the map of Ghana, which used to be called Gold Coast, and the map that we have here shows the mineral map of Ghana. And I can tell you that over 20 to 30% of our lands are surfaces that are mineral resourced. And that poses a threat to us, because if you have 20 to 30% of your land, which it's all filled with minerals, yes, there are opportunities for you to get the rent, but there are also associated issues, which I talked about the loss of forest cover, the pollution of water bodies, the human rights abuses that have been going on for all this while. And beyond these abuses, the issue of climate change has popped up. And when the issue being that when we look at most mining communities in Ghana, in the Western region, we do have communities like Takwa, Pristia, and for research done by Al-Hassan in 2017 showed that the rainfall pattern in the area of Takwa and Pristia, the pattern has been very erratic. Is that they've been mining for over 50 years to almost 100 years now. And these are places that are also filled with deciduous tropical evergreen forest. And these are places which are also very rich in our mineral resources such as bauxite, gold, and many other resources. So yes, so the issue of the problem arises of if we do have these rainfall patterns changing in these areas, what can be causing it? And so we took the remote sensing map for the Pristia area, which is very resourced in mineral resources such as gold. And in 1986, from the picture that I have, that was a picture taken of the area in 1986. In the year, and the red patches shows areas which are of mainly mining areas. That was in 1986. As of 2020 that we have now, this is the current state B of the area of Pristia, which is so endowed with several mineral resources. And the various red patches now shows the various mining activities that are ongoing with regards to large-scale mining activities and also small-scale mining activities, as well as issues of farming and other stuff. The white patch shows mining and other stuff. This tells us that the forest cover of the area is greatly diminishing, or it has really diminished. And we all do know the contribution of these forests to our climate. The more we do cut down these trees in making way for mining, the more the changes that will happen in the rainfall pattern, as science has already taught us. So the issue of mining and climate change, the issue with regards to the clearing of our forest reserves and making way for it really brings an issue. Also, in relation to our water bodies, yes, we know mining activities can't do without water. And it's also clear that mining activities have contributed to the pollution of water bodies. In Ghana, in places like New Montaha mine area, and when you also go to places like Obuase and Tapa, where research has been done that 5 to 100 people who are exposed to water bodies that are polluted by these mining activities stand a chance of having cancer. 5 to 100 people are likely to get cancer when they consume from these polluted water bodies as a result of mining. So the competition for water by communities and the mining industry is high because they need the water for their activities, for their combustion, for all the processes that they are involved in. We also look at mining and CO2 emissions, and a study done by Kwaku for 12 large-scale mining companies, and it revealed that it indicated that the total emissions estimated on an average of 1.46 497, and the units are there. It's as against the global average by NORGATE of 69.5. Yes, our total emission or our carbon footprint by the mining companies, by 12 mining companies in Ghana here is 1.7, which is below the level. However, this research also didn't take into consideration issues of small-scale mining companies and illegal mining companies that do go on across the country. So climate change really poses problems to both communities and the industry as well. I've talked about that of the community. With the industry, it poses physical risks with issues of floods, droughts, and availability of climate-sensitive energy and water inputs. This is really serious for mining companies because they really need the water to work. And where there are droughts as a result of climate change, it will impact on their activities. Also on the health and safety of workers in local communities where there are climate changes, it poses a threat to the communities and the mine employees as well. Also, when we talk about reputational risks of companies, where there are there is this.
Sorry, Kwaku, if I may interrupt, you just have 6 minutes to wrap up your presentation so that others can come in.
Okay. So it poses challenges to the mining companies as well. So beyond the reputational risks, there are also financial risks involved. That means more operating costs where they do not have water, and also it also brings about opportunities to the mining companies, where studies have shown that where in areas where there is more of ice now, where the climate becomes more hotter and warmer, it will melt, and to give opportunities for exploration of mining in other areas that hitherto they couldn't do. So looking at the shifting demands for minerals and under the Paris Agreement, companies and countries are to ensure that the carbon emissions level are below, and the global warming levels are put below 2 degrees Celsius. So, and those for the industrial ones too shouldn't be above 1.5. So when there is this demand, there's this study that was done by McKinsey and Company, and I looked at their projections that where companies decide to decarbonize, whereby they decide that they are going to reduce their carbon emission levels, which minerals would be affected the most. And from the study, by 2020, if companies, assuming that global warming is limited to 2 degrees, by virtue of that, the increased recycling rates will offset growth and decarbonization technologies for iron ore, lead, chromium, and manganese. That is minerals such as iron ore, bauxite, chromium, and those ones. There will be a reduction in demand for them if we are to reduce the global warming emission to 2 degrees by 2030. Also, there will be the demand for more electric vehicles, and by so doing, to increase the demand for the nickel, cobalt, lithium, and rare earths. Also, there will be an increase in demand for copper, and also because of the electric vehicles and turbines, solar panels, and batteries. And there is the general assertion that coal demand would decline by 50% as the power sector switches to wind, solar, and nuclear power. And also 50 to 100% of anticipated growth for uranium because of the nuclear power growth, which we'll be looking at. So these are the projections which have been made based on studies that around that. These are the minerals that which will contribute to decarbonization. They are the ones that will be in high commodity, and therefore countries or mineral resource countries within our areas who are resourced with these ones, which will have an increased growth or increased demand, they will be the ones that will have higher revenues, and also that will also be affected positively. For those where like the coal and the manganese and the bauxite, iron ore, where its reduction will be less, then revenues for these countries would shift and it will become lower. For us, looking at IFFs, I'm concluding on it, looking at IFFs and community perspective, it is important to understand that IFFs go beyond the limited definitions of the transfer of money illegally earned and used, and that it's the phenomenon of IFF should be understood in terms of the human development and economic losses that we are confronted with. Last year at the Forum, African Mining Forum, Mercy and Yamo Orengo, which I shared the panel with, made this statement, and she said that there are community people who, she met a 20-year-old miner who is handling more gold than the richest billionaire of Kenya, yet her children are dying of malnutrition. So mining activities has brought consequences on communities. And because of the illicit financial flows, companies are not really investing in the welfare of communities as they are supposed to, where water bodies from this picture are polluted because of mining. They dump mine rock waste and they provide alternatives. And if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you can see a mine waste dump complete just behind where they've dug a new borehole for this community. And the question is, how safe is this water body for this community?
A minute to wrap up.
Yes. So also on community perspectives and IFFs, we also look at the impacts of the mining on communities. This community was supposed to have been resettled with the rock waste so close to the community, but because companies wouldn't want to invest so much in the welfare of the communities, they do that. We have pictures whereby people's farmlands are being destroyed through rock waste from mining activities and being paid low levels of compensation. So in a gist, the interventions and concluding what should be done to look at the issues of climate change and mining and the impact on our forest reserves, our water bodies, and our revenues. We should also make laws as countries to prohibit mining in forest reserves that really contributes to the climate of an area. We should enact laws that also protect water bodies, application of polluter pays principles. Those who pollute should reclaim, and they should reclaim land. And also the FPIC of communities. Also, environmental impact assessment should not just be limited to just looking at the immediate environmental consequences, but also to look at the climate issues of the area that will be affected by the mines. And what I have here is what the industry should also do. They should diversify their operations, build relationships with communities, and also
thank you, Kwaku. Thank you. If you can allow me, you'd get the opportunity to present later on or to respond to some of the questions. I have two panelists that are waiting on standby.
Okay, so if this is my last slide.
Haggai from Zambia.
This is my last slide, so I'm very okay. Thank you very much.
Can you in a minute, please, wrap up?
Yeah, so in a gist, all that I'm saying is that there is the need for us to really take particular notice of the impacts of climate change on mining and also on the revenue and industry as well. I've already demonstrated. So there is the need that as we mine, let's look at issues that will affect the climate. There is very little research on climate change and its impact directly on mining. Yes, the industry has it, but really for CSOs and countries, we are not doing that. And through that, we can be shortchanged when we are making decisions concerning mining. So there's the need for us to take a critical look on our climate change and mining on revenues and the environment. Take a holistic approach to it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kwaku, for that incisive presentation. Great points that you have raised, and you have already triggered some of the questions that have begun to stream in from Leila. It's quite a dilemma for extractive-based states to balance between leveraging the sector for revenue generation and development on one hand, and climate change mitigation on the other. The mining sector is one of the major emitters of greenhouse gases, and it produces fossil energy resources that also significantly contribute to global carbon emissions. How can this be mitigated in light of the growing demand of extractives? This is a very, very critical question that we need to engage with. I'm sure Gloria and Haggai, you are listening. It's also important, as you also ventilated this discussion, to also balance with the new opportunities and challenges that are emerging as a result of new mineral value chains that are coming into more prominence that previously were not held as more prominent, such as lithium, cobalt, and that are very instrumental in terms of copper, that are also instrumental, I think, in terms of making sure that we cope up with the clean energy demand and also the technological factors. And what are the opportunities that are there in terms of leveraging on this huge demand to ensure that we mobilize enough resources to provide better schools, better clinics, and infrastructure, water, and other sanitation services. So this is an important issue that we need to tackle it all together, with these problems being stretched further by the impact of COVID. So to start with you, Gloria, in 5-6 minutes, at most 7 minutes, just respond to the issues that Kwaku has raised, and if you have got any other entry points that you think are very critical, please, you are free.
Hi, thank you very much, Mukasiri, and thank you, Kwaku, for that very comprehensive introduction to this very complex discussion. I think a lot of what Kwaku said really leverages on the specific impacts, and as he rightly put it, there's not a lot of research, so it's also very hard to really be informed in terms of what exactly do we need to do. Some of the issues that he highlighted, especially regarding the impacts on communities, I think that there's a huge gap in terms of our governments in the way that they're framing currently the fiscal regimes and frameworks on how these issues can be adequately mitigated, especially from a perspective of climate change. I'll give an example of Galekera mine here in Malawi. I think one of the issues that we discovered through our research recently has been that a simple issue of climate proofing investments, for example, is one thing that is not adequately considered currently by governments, including the cost of
we are losing Gloria. We seem to have lost Gloria. Haggai, are you there? Are you on standby?
Hi, Mukasiri.
Yeah, I'm there.
I'm back.
Okay. So just Haggai, just be on standby in case we lose Gloria. Please proceed, Gloria.
Thank you. So I think in just to be very quick, I think my network is very bad today, apologies. But essentially, I think we're looking at a few areas that need to be considered as we're looking in the future of revenue mobilization. The first being the risk that as countries continue to invest in fossil fuels and continue to generate resources now from fossil fuels and contribute to the climate problem, there's still the risk of stranded assets. And that has a huge impact on the revenue mobilization aspect, because what that means is that we could find ourselves invested in all these contracts and all these agreements, but not able to cash out on them because the world has shifted and everybody has moved on, and we're locked in as Africa, and we're not able to continue to develop economically because we don't have anything to do with those resources. There's also the high risk of liability for our countries because of these stranded assets. which means that we would be liable to pay the private sector. And I think that really speaks to the issue of the IFFs, because that already is too much of a cost for us to be considering. So under investor law, we would be compensated if we continue to engage in these agreements and investments. We would be obligated to pay investors once they move out. And I think that's something that we're not thinking about very, very, very deeply as a continent, because it will have implications, because the money that we are depending on to use for our development will then have to be used to compensate these companies and these investors. And that's because we have not factored that in right now to consider that what would be the cost of these investments in the future once the transition has completely taken over. The other aspect, of course, is how we can now really think about how investors and the high polluters, so the legacy polluters, how they can now come in to help us address the climate problem. Because to be realistic, the fact is that the challenges we're facing now, the extractive industry now has not really contributed to Africa's development, but it has continuously costed us. And so we're now bearing the cost of climate change, but we have not actually reaped the benefits of what has brought it about. And so the question that I think we're looking at now is, how do we compensate? How do we factor this into, whether it's the taxation policies, how can we recover those costs, and how can we make sure that African countries are not left worse off because they now have to pay the price of climate change when we did not actually incur that cost, because high polluter countries have actually contributed highly to the level of global greenhouse gas emissions. So I think looking forward, there's a huge scope of tax justice on how these things can be factored in, how climate change can be factored into the tax policy framework, but also looking at how we can now move forward in terms of the transparency and accountability in the sector. How does this work now? If we're looking at the energy shift, how does this look? How do we account for the carbon impacts, and how do countries that have contributed highly account for this and report on this and provide solutions in terms of how we can minimize the emissions and meet the current ceiling that we have of 1 degree to 1.5. So I think that's really, in a nutshell, how I would summarize what we think. Hello?
Yes, Gloria. Can you wrap up, please? Thanks.
So I think that's really how we should be looking forward, because the impacts of climate change and the extractive, the relationship is very clear, and Kwaku really makes it very clear that there is that relationship. It's been determined, but then how do we justify it? How do we determine in our policies how we recover from investors those costs that we're now going to meet as a continent because of the past legacy of emissions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gloria. I think the key point there I can pick, I know you shared a number of issues, is that before we even dream about getting the benefits from the extractive sector, how do we make sure that we recoup costs that are burdened on the community because of on the host community or mining communities because of the activities of mining? That's a very critical one. Then I move to you, Haggai. You have got about 7 minutes at most to try to also respond to the issues that Kwaku earlier on shared, as well as Gloria. What is your take?
Okay, thank you very much. Am I clear? Hello?
Loud and clear.
All right, thank you. I'll take it up first from the negative impacts of the climate change negative impacts of mining in Zambia. I'll look at it from a perspective of Zambia. What Kwaku presented actually, those leverage around almost all the countries. But then, in addition to that, maybe would be the challenges around the environment, like the air pollution with sulfur dioxide. Like in Zambia, we have a situation where Mopani is mining from Mufurila, where they emit this sulfur dioxide, which has a health impact on the people, and also on the vegetation and also we have an impact on the surface water and groundwater, and also soil pollution with acidic. Then we also look further at the negative impacts on the community, where community downstream suffer from diarrhea and other diseases. We have situations like in Kansanshi, we have tilling dams that are near to the water bodies, just like Kwaku presented. You have tilling dams that are near the water bodies, and the water bodies are affected. So you have water polluted, and when people take that water, there are health implications that they go through. Then on the social economic impact, we discover that there's also increase in corruption and also cooptation of different actors. We are talking of lack of work security, labor absenteeism, firings, unemployment, loss of livelihood, and land dispossession. All these are impacts that are coming in due to, of course, the mining, and they have also an impact on the environment. And these impacts also could be classified as at a larger scale due to some of the issues of the climate change. But then when we look at the issues of how this climate change is impacting on the revenue mobilization, how do we deal with it as a country? I'll give one example on the issues of legal and institutional framework. Zambia has got quite a number of environmental acts and climate change acts, but one of the challenges that we have that actually is making us even lose the revenue from the issues that are coming from the mining, the pollution, and the climate change impact that is coming with it is the legal and the institutional framework, particularly its implementation and enforcement, is still considered to be weak in Zambia. We have all these legal acts, we have all these acts that have been put in place, but the implementation of these acts are a challenge. So even the companies that are actually posing this bigger challenge of climate change, like the mining companies that are doing the emission of waste in the rivers, the emission of the pollution, the air pollution, they can't get the right charges from the government because our implementation and enforcement is very weak. And then you find out that there is no collaboration among different sectors. You have ZEMA that has to deal with the environmental issues. You have other institutions like the local government that are supposed to deal with also environmental issues at local level, but then they can't collaborate and see how they can try to put up the right charges to ensure that the right costs are accrued from these institutions that are contributing to the climate change through issues of pollution and also other issues. But then going forward, one issue that we should also look at is strengthening the promotion of sub-regional resource mobilization. How do the council, the local government comes up, or the sub-regional entities come up with policies or bylaws that help in ensuring that the environment is protected and charges are done from the local perspective? because this will mean when there is enough resource mobilization or revenue mobilization at local level, they'll be able to use that resource to ensure that they mitigate some of this impact of climate change at local level. Lastly, my contribution will be on the illicit financial flows. I think while improved tax administration and better tax policies at the domestic level are essential, illicit financial flows, including trade misinvoicing, present a major obstacle to efforts to mobilize domestic resources for sustainable development. And we want to look at an issue where we need to ensure that the government find ways of curbing illicit financial flows, because some of the money that will be realized from the from curbing illicit financial flows will be channeled back to the communities to deal with some of these climate change issues that have been brought out by Kwaku and also the contribution from Gloria. So we need to ensure that the government tries to find much efforts on how to tackle illicit financial flows and ensure that they get a fair tax, there are proper legal systems and also financial systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Haggai. I think you are making very interesting observations there. One key takeaway is that let us make sure that we understand the impact of illicit financial flows, that they are costs that are already burdened on the communities, and how these need to be make sure that they are recouped, which is a similar, it finds resonance also with what Gloria was sharing, which appears now to be like a double-edged sword. We are losing out because of climate change impacts, and yet we are not benefiting from the revenues that are coming from the sector itself. We are welcoming comments, questions from the floor. Feel free to raise your hand and also make use of the chat box to fire in terms of your comments and questions. Sorry. I'm seeing Robert. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Mukasiri and the panelists and speakers. I have been intrigued most specifically by the submissions by Haggai on the need for, first of all, interagency coordination. The need for interagency coordination and also in the lack of policy coherency. My discussion when I'm looking at this topic on climate change in specific terms, but also on the overall broad impacts of the various investments in the sector that happen at the source of particular extractives, including human rights services and the rest, and then relating it to the losses from taxation. I think there is one point that we need to think about at such a discussion and make recommendations. And this one is the interaction between the various agreements, international or bilateral, that our governments make with the investors. We tend in such discussions to make them separate. For instance, an investor will come from a given country and come and invest in Zambia, utilizing a bilateral investment treaty, which essence of the bilateral investment treaty is to protect the investor as an individual against abuses of his rights by the state. Now, when you go in the detail of the bilateral investment treaties in those countries, There are clauses that are clear on profit repatriation, that are clear on responsive investment. But when it comes to taxation, they tell you that taxation issues are exclusive in this bilateral investment treaties. They will be handled in the double taxation agreements between that country and the other. Now, the double taxation agreements, unfortunately, are discussion between states and states, while bilateral investment treaties are state and an investor as an individual. But the overall impact of abuse of either impacts on the nationals. So what I think going forward in such a discussion is, how do we think of legal or policy recommendations that try to harmonize investment treaties, taxation treaties, and all trade treaties, so that they seem to speak to the same language and address a given issue? Because whereas an investor is controlled by the UN guiding principles on human rights and business, not to abuse climate and the rest, he's given a leeway to repatriate 100% profit. And in some countries, you find they're allowing him even to invest 100% ownership of a given company. That one has a risk on itself on the taxation aspects. It can perpetuate a tax evasion and avoidance. How should these two speak together if you are to address both the impact of the investment on the community vis-a-vis the domestic revenue mobilization aspects that we are talking about? I thank you.
Thanks, Robert. We also NGARASSAL that is on the line. Please go ahead.
Allô? Allô, bonjour. Allô? Okay. Allô? Allô? Bonjour.
Hello, we can hear you.
Ok, merci. Je voudrais poser la question à Gloria. Tout à l'heure, elle avait intervenu sur la question de taxation sur la pollution, d'où l'Afrique ne pollue pas assez. Pourquoi aujourd'hui l'Afrique paye les taxes sur la pollution? Moi, je me pose la question aussi de savoir, parce que ça, ce sont des décisions au niveau mondial que les gens ont arrêtées, et nos pays polluent peu, et pourquoi nos gouvernements acceptent de signer de telles conventions qui mettent en responsabilité leur pays. Et ça, c'est une question que je pose aussi aux différents chefs d'État africains en ce qui concerne la pollution en Afrique, parce que l'Afrique pollue peu, mais l'Afrique paye la taxe sur la pollution. Moi, je voudrais poser encore une deuxième question sur la question liée beaucoup plus à l'exploitation des industries extractives dans nos pays. Et nous savions que quand on exploite le pétrole sur une surface donnée, cette exploitation pétrolifère amène à la dégradation des sols cultivables. Et dans nos pays, on a fait de telle sorte que cette question est beaucoup plus une question liée à ceux qui sont en charge de diriger le pays. Et quand les organisations de la société civile qui s'organisent pour défendre le cas de riverains, pour défendre le cas de vulnérables, on n'entend pas cela. Je prends un exemple dans votre pays, le Tchad, avec l'exploitation de pétrole dans la zone de Mangara, où une société chinoise avait déversé les déchets pétrolifères sur toute une surface cultivable où le bœuf de mouton passe là, et tout ce qui passait par là, les animaux tombaient, ils mouraient, et cette partie-là est dégradée complètement. Face à une telle dégradation de l'environnement. Et quand on fait des bruits, vous voyez que notre bruit n'arrive pas à un certain niveau et ces bruits s'arrêtent. Parce que je pense que c'est le plus fort qui domine sur le plus faible aujourd'hui. Alors, la société civile, elle n'est pas écoutée chez elle, elle n'est pas écoutée aussi ailleurs parce qu'elle fait une entrave aux intérêts des uns et des autres. Alors, face à cette difficulté, en tant que des acteurs non étatiques, quel conseil donnerez-vous aux organisations de la société civile pour qu'ils contribuent efficacement à la lutte contre le changement climatique? Qui dit changement climatique, il y a aussi la question de la corruption, il y a la question de dégradation de l'environnement et autres. Il y a beaucoup des aléas qui entrent dans cette thématique-là. Merci. Je disais, qui dit changement climatique, le changement climatique prend en compte.
Okay, thanks. NGARASSAL, you have been asked to repeat the last part of your question.
Ok. Alors, la dernière partie de ma question, je dis qui dit changement climatique. Le changement climatique envoie à la question la dégradation de l'environnement. Et là où il y a la dégradation de l'environnement, l'aspect de la corruption est à haute sphère. Et ce sont tous ces effets-là qui ont l'impact sur l'espace cultivable. Et en tant que des organisations de la société civile, des organisations non étatiques qui défendent bec et ongle la question du changement climatique ou de la dégradation de l'environnement, aujourd'hui, elle n'est pas écoutée ni par les autorités au niveau local, ni au niveau international, parce que ça, ce sont des enjeux. C'est des enjeux beaucoup plus macroéconomiques, d'où les intérêts des uns et des autres sont remis en cause. Et aujourd'hui, on fait office pour bloquer les organisations de la société civile pour pouvoir dénoncer ce qui n'est pas faisable. Alors, je voudrais savoir, en tant qu'organisation de la société civile, quel conseil donnerez-vous aux organisations de la société civile de continuer à mener cette action sur le terrain? Merci. Merci. Allô? Allô?
Thank you very much. I'm sure you've heard the questions that are coming in. So as we reflect on them, we just want to give our presenters, starting first with the Kwaku, to be able to respond, but also to broaden the discussion, not only to look at it from climate change, from what we see happening at the community level, which is directly linked to the extraction costs within our localities, because we should be mindful that much of the challenges that we are facing from climate change are not because of Africa. They are because of the industrialization of the West, the East, and so forth. So that imbalance should also come in. What do we do with the discovery of oil and gas that is happening now in Africa? You're talking about the Kenya, Uganda, Mozambique, and so forth. Do you leave these assets on the ground? I think earlier on, Gloria also raised the issue of assets that can be stranded vis-a-vis our need to be able to benefit from such resources, but under a different context that is operating. So we are now forced in terms of domestic resource mobilization with the conundrum of having an asset which ordinarily should have also helped to steer the growth of our industries. But that asset, because of the time difference we are engaged on, is now getting more scrutiny than before, and at the same time giving pressure in terms of how we are going to benefit on how we are going to get maximum revenue benefit from the clean energy minerals. So this conundrum is something that we also need to grapple with in this discussion. So I give you the opportunity, Kwaku first, then Gloria, you can come in, be prepared, and Haggai too. Thanks.
Am I on?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Okay. So just to keep it short, I think in most of our questions we also give our recommendations, and in that I wouldn't want to go over most of the issues that we've already talked about. But taking it from the last one, how really do we address the issue of climate change and the environment and the taxation and the revenue aspect? I think as a country, we should all start looking at issues of our individual laws. Yes, we may go and sign on to the international protocols and ratify them, but are we really gazetting and ratifying them in our local laws or in our national laws? And when I say that, I'm using that with specific reference to our resources, especially our forest resources. For those of us in West Africa, we do have lots and lots of forest reserves. What policies are we putting in place that will protect our forest resources? Yes, the resources, one, as I said earlier on, we do have lots of these minerals there. But as a country, we should know what we will do when we talk about mining. Do we want to mine responsibly, responsible mining, and have this forest cover, or we would want to put all these forest cover away through the open cast system or the surface mining system and move on to and destroy all these forest cover? So I know that particularly proud to Ghana before the 80s and 1990s, most of our mining companies were underground mining companies. And underground, I mean they were mining underneath and you still had the surface of the earth intact. What has happened to it? Well, it's largely because the business or the industry feels that it's much more cost effective to rather mine now from the surface. And also it's more, for them, it's also not so dangerous. So it's better to mine from the surface than do the underground mine. So as countries, we should start looking at the various laws and how we would want to approach mining in our countries. And we should stop the race to the bottom issues with our laws, whereby we see that, oh, Zambia, they don't have any regulation on this aspect of their lands. When we come to Ghana, well, the issues of mining in forest reserves or in water bodies, well, when you just get the license, you can mine anywhere in the forest reserve. We should start looking at our national laws first. And I believe that civil societies, we should start looking at these issues, because you can't, let's be frank, it is very, very difficult to take the minerals without destroying the earth, unless we decide to go the underground type. And I don't know whether that's the most efficient for. So I believe as countries, as CSOs, let's start advocating for much more effective laws that will protect our environment. I'm not a proponent more for taxing more on companies, because by that time the destruction would have been done already. Let's put the laws in place and protect our environment. Let's protect our community people and see how best we can economically get our monies without much destruction to the earth surface and to the very existence why we are here on earth, which is mainly due to the environment. So this is what I would want to share now. The others, yes, we've talked about it, so I wouldn't want to repeat it as the other panelists have said. Let's start looking at our national laws, and let's stop doing the race to the bottom system of comparing laws and reducing our regulatory regimes just to attract mining companies into our system.
Thank you very much, Kwaku. great points there to conclude. I think it's very clear that when you talk about the race to the bottom, the definition has been expanded, or the impact of it thereof. It's not only about tax incentives, but having watertight environmental regulations, laws, and also enforcing them, because companies can unfairly declare profit by undermining the costs of extraction, the environmental, social, cultural costs that are burdened, especially on host communities and future generations. So the loss that we have, as much as we, the likes of UNCTAD, the Beck report estimates 50 billion and say the problem is going now to about 89 billion. But if we are to factor in and tie this conversation with what also was presented yesterday by Professor Bond and others, to what extent are we also factoring in the ecological debt and how unfairly the cost, the financial accounting processes are manipulated not to fairly account for such environmental, economic, social, cultural costs. But this also an important point that you also raised, Gloria, in your presentation. And also might be mindful of other questions earlier on that have also propped up. Please, can you kindly respond? And also to participants, feel free to make use of our question and answer session to bring forward your questions and comments. And also those that would want, please raise your hand. We still have got 20 minutes to robustly engage on this issue. Thank you. Gloria, please go ahead.
I thought we're wrapping up. Thank you, Mukasiri. There was a question on why we're paying taxes as African countries when we're not the heavy polluters. And I think it actually resonates with a lot of the sentiments, and I think it's been globally agreed that developing countries should be allowed to continue emitting because we need it for development. So this is something that in global discussions, I think it's come out very strongly. It's obviously the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So the reason that we pay, though, is because as developing countries, we are actually increasing our levels of emission. So, for example, for Malawi's emissions, I think over the last 10 years, our level of emissions have increased by about 40%, which is a huge increase. And it's because we're industrializing and there's a lot of activities happening that are increasing the levels of emissions. So I don't think that it would be reasonable for us not to be able to develop domestic taxes that help us to mitigate, because the reality is that even though we're not the heavy polluters, but climate change impacts will affect us, and they're affecting us the most. If you look at Cyclone Haggai, the cost alone of recovering from Cyclone Haggai was so high on our economies, it set us back years. So as we continue to develop, we do need to be able to have our own resources that help us to mitigate and adapt. Countries like Malawi have developed the carbon tax, for example. Now the challenge comes in to say, what are those resources being used for? And that's where the question of accountability and transparency comes in, to now define that we want to be able to have access to that data, to know what that the resource base is being used for. When our carbon tax was introduced, it was supposed to go into the climate fund, where it could facilitate mitigation and adaptation across the country, which means that it would have enabled us to come up with integrated interventions where you have mining companies, you have different sectors coming together and developing adaptation and mitigation plans. But it was used for political purpose. It was actually politically motivated. And so most of it has been lost through corruption and other uses. I think at this point, it's about 800 million Malawi kwacha, billion Malawi kwacha, which is a lot of money for our country. But if it would have all been able to go into the climate fund, it could have done so much for mitigation technologies and helping communities adapt. So I think that's something that when we said we have to look at how reporting would look like now, that's what we should be thinking about as countries, as CSOs, to then say, how do we use data on taxes, to inform how our countries are responding to climate change, the climate change problem, because it is cross-cutting, and it's not just in the mining sector, it's also in the health sector, agriculture sector, water sector, energy sector, as Kwaku already shared. Another issue is that's also why we're looking at how the EITI now, with the social and environmental reporting, how it can actually be able to generate such data for us to be able to continue to understand how we're contributing to climate mitigation and adaptation within our countries. So it's indeed important to push for such platforms that allow us to access such data, but also allow us to have such conversations. In terms, I didn't hear the last question. I didn't hear the last part, Mukasiri, but I think what I may have understood was that how do we as countries, as African countries, move forward and adapt? I'm not sure. You'd have to clarify to me on that.
I missed it too, but you can also respond to in the manner that you have just shared.
Okay, so I think just to build on what Kwaku had said in terms of the policies, we need to start thinking about how we can develop policies that do integrate the different aspects. I think it's decided that African countries will continue to produce fossils for some time, but we cannot be blind to the reality that we are also the hardest hit by climate change. So as we're continuing into the current framework, we should also be thinking about what the future, the transition looks like. So in terms of the minerals needed for the transition. So one thing Mukasiri really said that really stood out for me was the issue of IFFs, where you're looking at how the wealth being generated should be invested back into Africa's development. The past years, we have extracted oil and gas, and it's all been taken out of the continent to enable development, industrialization in the global West. So now, as we talk about extraction of minerals for the transition, we're also taking them all out, and they're going into the West, and they're developing technologies for mitigation, and they will be able to mitigate. They will be able to withstand climate change impact, but we will be left again with no resources and no technologies. And so that's why our current framework should look at how, as we're extracting for the future, as we're looking into mining for the future, how is it also going to be able to stay in the continent and contribute to mitigation and adaptation? Because one thing that's for sure is that we will be left behind, and we need to find a way to make sure that we're able to catch up. We're already far behind, and we can't still be saying that fossil fuels, we're going to continue to extract oil and gas, and we're going to continue to use coal to drive our economies. Yes, we may do that in the short term, but in the long run, we already need to have plans in place. We need to have policies in place that enable us to do that. Thank you.
Powerful, profound. Thanks very much, Gloria. I think you are raising some very, very critical issues here that in the past, our oil and the gas have been extracted and used to support industrialization. Now we are faced with the same conundrum when it comes to clean energy minerals. They are going again to be taken from us and then be used to compensate in terms of the climate change risks and leave Africa exposed. And if anything, we would want those technologies to fire us, more resources are going to be required, and we are not better positioned. I also like the other point that you raised. Much as we are faced with the COVID conundrum or the challenge that has been posed by COVID, we have not recovered from Cyclone Idai, particularly for countries in the Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, and so forth. And now, so this goes on to show that despite our theme that we have in terms of recovery post-COVID, our challenges are much more bigger than the COVID pandemic has exposed. We have no capacity. I think he talked about in East Africa, the locust that we saw causing wreaking havoc to respond to climate change impacts, droughts, floods, and so forth. So I want to come to you, Kwaku, and this conversation is getting heated up. What is your response? What is your take? Just tie up this conversation with other speakers, what other speakers have shared, and also including the comments and the questions that have emerged from the floor.
Yeah, so it's yeah, so I what Gloria said in her submission, that yes, we are sending these, we are exploiting these minerals to the West, and they are rather putting in mitigation measures whilst we just exploit and just send them. And I think it's very, very powerful, and there is the need for all of us to take a cue from that. As they are developing climate impact mitigation measures, what are we also doing as countries? So a lot has been shared, but as Gloria and I have also shared initially, that there is very little research on issues of climate change and its direction to its relationship to mining. And there is the need for us to really do that, because for Ghana, with our case study, we've been mining for the past, God knows how many years, over 100 years now. So why not do a very detailed study as a country and analyze? We do have all these mining areas. We should have the data to be able to tell us and get us informed as a country that what are the impacts of these mining activities on the climate of an area within a certain period of time. For the past 50 years, we've mined in Pristia, we've mined in Obuasi. What has been an impact? We should have data to inform us going forward on how best we will address the issues of climate change in new areas that we would want to mine. And as I was saying, the issues of environmental impact assessment that is conducted prior to mining activities, it should be done consistently, because when we are mostly when you take into considerations environmental impact assessments of companies, hardly do you find issues of climate change, its impact on communities and the environment really popping up. As a country, let's start putting into our regulatory frameworks, what will be the impacts of these activities on the outcome. We should know all these things as a country if we are to decide on whether or not we would want to mine at its current stage. The data should be available for us to make these decisions on as an individual. And also moving forward as countries, whether or not we are going to derive revenues from these companies or not. Now, when you take data, these mining companies, they are supposed, and these extractive oil and gas companies, they sign bonds in their various IFCs where they get their loans that they are going to go by carbon emission levels. How well are we as African countries? How well are we monitoring whether they are complying? Or is it just that we are just we are just looking at just getting the mineral? These companies, these Western countries, they've set emission levels for these multinational mining companies that they should follow. Are we as countries also following up on that if we do not have the laws to really regulate that? Let's take a holistic approach to issues concerning mining, climate change, and taxing, and the illicit financial flows in our sector. I'm really much more concerned about the direct impact on the environment, because if we are able to do that, we'll begin to tackle how the illicit financial flows out of the sector. When we look at it at the monetary term, yes, there are various economic policies, regulatory frameworks, strengthening our institutions, our revenue and other institutions. We as a country, we know that these economic options are available for us. Let's concentrate on getting enough data to inform us on mining, the environment, climate change, then also use that as basis to develop other tax policies and revenues to address the illicit financial flows as well in our economies. There's enough data, there's enough evidence to show that, yes, mining is having an impact on climate in our area. Let's begin to use these data to really take the industry on and make better policies from them.
Thanks very much, Kwaku. We are now about to wrap up the conversation. We're left with 7 minutes. Any comments, questions from the floor?
Kwesu, Mukasiri.
Yes.
I just want to put up a contribution on the impact assessment that Kwaku has just raised. Most of the time, I think we only concentrate on the impact assessment that is done before the mines are open. But we forget that as the mines start operating, there is continuous impact, actually more impact that is done to the environment, which most of us, even the civil society organization, actually don't pay an ear to continue monitoring the impact that the mining have on the environment as they go on in their mining, in their doing of the mine work. We have situations where you have smelters built within the communities, and these smelters are emitting what? How are we following up on the impact that these are having on the local people? Because all those are contributing to climate change. So building up on what Kwaku has said, we need to also come up with facts, factual research that are continuous and show us what really the actual impact is, so that even as we come in with the advocacy part as civil society organizations, we are coming up with the informed advocacy work that are factual. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Haggai. I want to quickly share the experience from Zimbabwe. When the environmental impact assessments are being done, all other issues are factored in, but the challenge comes to the budget, the costs that are anticipated when it comes to the environmental obligations. There is no independent verification and audit. There is also no independent verification and audit of the costs. There is also no due diligence to check if the company has got capacity in terms of finance or to be able to meet the environmental costs. And as as implementation happens, the same applies. No one is clear whether the cost of rehabilitation and mine closure funds that have been set aside in the provision, how adequate it is, how it is going to be managed. So there are a lot of transparency and accountability challenges that arise as a result. And automatically, if you cannot control the costs that are very clearly patent on the communities, it means that whatever you are talking about in terms of benefits, it becomes a zero-sum game. So as we conclude, I just want to give a minute each to you, starting with Gloria, and then Haggai, reverse order, and Kwaku, in terms of the way forward, just to wrap up this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukasiri. It's been such a great discussion. I think with this topic alone, I think there's always a lot of learning going on, and I think that also applies for a lot of the participants today, where we're now saying that we still have a lot of questions in terms of how we can actually move forward in terms of integrating climate change into our, whether it's advocacy work and issues of tax justice. But like I said, I think we have so many opportunities, especially now, as the push is very strong from everywhere in the globe, for us to make those changes in our policy and regulatory frameworks and have an influence in terms of how the extractive sector will look like in the next few years for us. I know that a lot here maybe still agree that as developing countries, we should still be allowed to continue to extract fossils and benefit from them. But I think that we are in a position now where we need to start influencing our government to make longer term plans, to start thinking of integration of climate change into our development plans, and how the extractive sector in our specific countries and on the continent is going to mitigate the impacts of climate change for us. So this is going beyond looking at the economic, the revenues, but also looking at how we can look at issues of industrialization, of processing, and how we can go further up into the value chain, so that we're not just in a place where we're benefiting from the revenues themselves, but also from the technologies. We're able to have the technologies, and that beyond this period during the transition, or when the transition does finally come to stay, we should also be prepared as African countries, and we should be resilient. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hello, Mukasiri.
Yes, please go ahead in a minute.
All right, okay. For me, in my conclusion, I think I have one issue that I really want for most of us to question government. Most of these governments have set up what is called the Environmental Management Fund, that we actually don't know where these funds go, which are supposed to be funds to mitigate the climate change issues. So we really need to start questioning our governments. This fund that they created, is it now being used for other political issues, or it should be channeled back to ensure that they start mitigating some of these issues in the community in terms of climate change? Then the other issue is, I think we also need an empowerment around the sub-regional entities like the local councils. They really need to be empowered, especially through acts on taking charge of some of these companies that are posing a great challenge on the environment in those areas, and charge them to ensure that whatever they realize from there is actually utilized in terms of mitigating some of these climate change issues that are being raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haggai. Kwaku, can you give us your final word?
Yes, so for my final word, I would now want to put on my community advocacy cap. And I think as Africans, we should begin to see ourselves equally as investors, and not just seeing the West as investors. We do call these multinational mining companies as, yes, they are investors, they are coming to mine and we get revenue. But at the end of the day, the data in our countries are beginning to show that when you do a cost-benefit analysis of the mining sector to the environment and to other sectors of the economy, there are so many issues for us to address. So as a country, we should begin to start making informed decisions on the cost-benefit analysis data of mining to us. And let's start giving the free, prior, and informed consent to the people who will be affected by mining activities. So that if I'm going to mine within this area for like 50 years, definitely the climate within that area is going to affect the farmers. The climate is going to change as a result of the deforestation and the pollution of water bodies. Therefore, the people there must be given the opportunity to decide whether or not they would want to accept mining as an activity or not. And this has been well accepted in United Nations Indigenous Peoples' Rights. And we've also signed on to other regional protocols in West Africa in the country and ratified them. Let's start giving the power to our communities to make these decisions to accept mining or not, based on cost-benefit analysis of mining, so that they can also protect their investments as farmers, their investments as fishermen, their investments as people who depend on the environment, and have through that use that to support their children and their homes. And we shouldn't destroy them by virtue of just inviting multinational mining companies in who come to destroy the climate of the area and also the livelihood of the people. Let's take informed decisions on that.
Thank you very much, Kwaku, Gloria, Haggai. This has been quite a fantastic panel, and the discussion is quite been rigorous. Allow me to also thank those that have contributed and also listened to this important conversation. For now on, let me hand on to Chennai just to give us some few housekeeping issues so that we can be clear in terms of the program for the day after this one.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again so much for joining us in our second plenary session. We are now going to be having a 30-minute break to allow you to get some lunch or take a bit of a bathroom break. And then following that, in 30 minutes, we will be having our breakaway sessions. And so from 2 to 3 o'clock, we have 4 different breakaway sessions. The links that you should have received, and then from 3:15 to 4:15 we will have 3 other breakaway sessions. So we're really encouraging you to please join us in those breakaway sessions. We're trying to create them to be much more intimate spaces so that we can delve into the topics into much more detail. Once we've gone through those, we ask you to then join us for our closing plenary session, which will be after our second set of breakaway sessions to essentially conclude our activities and events for today. So thank you again for joining us, and hopefully see you a bit later. For those of you who will be joining us for our third plenary session later this afternoon, it will be this very same link that we will be using to make that available to you. Thanks very much. I can end, right?
Thank you.